My name is Sophie Alcorn. I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration and host of the Sophie Alcorn podcast, columnist at TechCrunch. I enjoy meditation. I'm a mom. And a little bit about me is I believe that we should live in a world where every child has the chance to fulfill their innate potential and self-actualize. And it would be amazing to live in a world where borders don't get in the way of people becoming their best selves. And so to the extent we can do that for startup founders and brilliant people who we help from around the world, we're so excited to do so. And that's why we try to do a lot of educational content like this webinar. So a big welcome to you, everybody. And I already see some of the questions piling up and coming in, so that's fantastic. But allow me to introduce everybody to my amazing colleague, Linda Haggerty. Linda is a legal genius, and I am so thrilled that she joined Alcorn going on over a year and a half ago now, basically, right, Linda? Yeah.
Right.
So Linda's a way better lawyer than I am.
Oh,
I'm great. I'm glad that we have.
I'm a technician. I'm the detail. You are the visionary.
I'm happy to like map out big things, but Linda's the one who actually makes sure that our clients' cases get done to our standards of excellence, and she leads our entire legal team. And also a proud mom. And I mean, you've been fascinated with immigration even before law school yourself, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would bring every exchange student home. I was planning to like live abroad as a child. I mean, it's just always been like a drive for me. And now my daughter's in Belfast, so she's living my dream.
That's amazing. Living vicariously through our children.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And to everybody joining us, this is our team at Alcorn Immigration Law. We need one more photo because we recently welcomed another stellar attorney to our team, which is very exciting, Lana. So if you're an Alcorn client or if you are interested in hiring us, you may meet our other attorneys, Corey and Lana, who are incredible. And let's see, we've been in business for 8 years since I started the law firm from my kitchen in Mountain View. And we've helped thousands of people from around the world, many founders, many companies, rapidly scaling startups. We can help people from any country come to the United States and get visas and green cards usually based on employment categories. And I love that everybody is putting questions in the Q&A panel. That is perfect. We're gonna try to go through all of them today. And one easy question, can a student subscribe to your mailing list? Yes, anybody can subscribe to our mailing list. So if you'd like, you could send a message to Alexandria Parson with your email and she can make sure to get you on there. Thank you so much. And on that mailing list, we provide twice a month updates. We're always summarizing some of the latest immigration updates. We feature links to the weekly TechCrunch articles and the bi-weekly podcasts, and have a lot of insights. And also that's where we advertise future webinars. So we're going to have some coming up on H-1B season, for example, and all the amazing H-1B changes that recently dropped and other regulatory updates. So let's see. Okay. Now this is some audience polling we would like to do. And I am going to launch this poll of where you are on your journey. And this is just for us to get to know you a little bit. So if you're listening to a recording later, I'll just read some of these questions. You know, are you a founder? Are you interested in charting your own course to immigration? Do you need multiple income streams? Are you fundraising? Are you subject to the India or China green card backlogs? Have you already started your own company? So obviously this is not like an exhaustive list of questions, and you might want to say yes to all of them. I don't even know if you have the option to that. I think it's multiple choice. But it looks like just about everybody has filled this out already. So if you want to take a moment, if you haven't yet, and just click on which thing you resonate with the most, this will help us get to know you. But Wow, it looks like, okay, so we have a well-attended webinar today, and it appears that 80% of the people in the audience are startup founders, already self-identifying as startup founders. And that's kind of a big deal because a lot of people want to be startup founders, but they're afraid to, or it takes a lot of life planning to get ready. And proud of you for even being willing to admit you're a founder.
It's a
So,
leap. It really is. So yeah.
yeah, it's tremendous because it's really scary because you don't know when you're diving into the unknown and you have this hope and vision of something you want to create, but you don't know if anybody else is going to like it or even if you can build it, right? So it can
Yeah.
feel very risky. Okay, we have more interest for people seeking multiple income streams. 25% of you are interested in being able to make money in more than one way. We see that a lot. We see people, because our clients are such like brilliant global experts. I mean, I was on a call last week, Linda, where somebody was like, wait, I was looking at their resume. I'm like, does this mean that you were the top person in the world in a math competition in high school multiple times? And they were like, yeah, but it's high school, so it doesn't count. I'm like, no, I mean, that's not the point. You got number one in the world.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, is that a big deal? And I'm
And
like,
so
well,
modest, right?
I can't use it for your green card, but I'm
Let's talk
impressed.
about
You're
it.
like, oh, I didn't realize that wasn't normal. So
Yeah.
we have really brilliant clients who have lots of financial opportunities to make money. So that could include advising startups for pay or for equity, getting hourly consulting work in your area of expertise, writing a book, having multiple jobs, maybe launching multiple companies. I mean, creative people are doing lots of things.
Mhm.
Okay, what else we got? Oh, 44% are fundraising. That's interesting. I don't know about you, Linda. I've seen some new trends over the last 6 months in fundraising with our clients. And I think it's a result of interest rates and just the general changes in the venture approach lately. But I've seen more and more founders want to be bootstrapping their companies. So they're saying, well, we're gonna just like, we have a community, it's not making money yet, but we have 10,000 users and we really want to launch the paid tier. And how do we do that? Because we're all on H1B. But if we can do that, then we can iterate with our pricing model and then we can get traction and then we'll be in a much better negotiating position when we go raise money because then we can get money to scale. So it's been so interesting because a year ago, 2 years ago, more than that, it was like, well, if you have a pitch deck and you have one technology product founder and one sales co-founder, you take your pitch deck and you raise $5 million. And then
Right.
like, what are we building?
Straight line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then people are now asking like, well, I haven't raised VC money. Can I even qualify? So I think that's one of the things we'll talk about today is like, yes, VCs are a newer invention than immigration laws. So there was immigration before there were VCs, and it's only one path up the mountain, but it's certainly not the only path. Okay, we're going to be talking a lot about this, the India and China green card backlogs. About half of our attendees have to deal with that in one way or another. So that'll be a big focus, looking at the November visa bulletin and dissecting it and talking about how that works. And 44% have already started a company. So awesome. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating. That is really helpful. And Linda, do those numbers seem pretty, I'll share the results. There we go. Do those numbers seem pretty in line with the types of potential clients you've spoken with lately in consultations, or what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely see like a pattern here and what we're seeing in terms of our intakes. And it's very interesting because like you mentioned, the bootstrapping. I'm hearing those magic words a little bit more these days too. And it's really fascinating. And a lot of people have developed this product, like they're ready to put it in the market, and they're doing this through bootstrapping. And it's so impressive to me. So yeah, I would say all of this though is consistent with what we're seeing.
Great, thank you. All right. Oh, how do I just end this? Okay, there we go. There we go. All right. Okay, and then to the individual who wanted to be on the mailing list, that is now in the webinar chat window. So there you go. All right. So, Linda, what would you say? 80% of our audience are startup founders, 50% are from India and China. What's the answer? What should they do? What if they want a green card?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I live in the perm world too. So the challenge with the perm track green card is you can't have substantial equity in your company and be sponsored for a perm because you'd be sponsoring yourself essentially, and you can't really conduct a fair labor market if you own the majority of the company. So if you're looking for a green card, these are really the pathways. And the beauty in this is that these are much faster than the perm process. You're jumping the first step and you're going right to the I-140 if you meet the qualifications for the EB-1A, that's the fastest. Same with EB-1C, those are both first employment preference. And then you have the EB-2 national interest waiver, which is a great option, but it doesn't get you into the first preference. So it's always a consideration if you're from China or India and you really need that first employment preference.
Yeah. And I would say this is a very individual approach, a very individual process to deciding this. One of the things that's come up for me a lot lately when I've been talking to potential new clients and outlining their strategy is simply the desire to get a priority date, any priority date, to at least get a spot in line to start waiting. And so a lot of aspiring startup founders are in the US through a student visa, an F1 visa, and often they come for bachelor's or master's degrees and study in the STEM field, and then they have a year of regular OPT and 2 years of STEM OPT. But if you're in that situation and you're from India or China, nobody has sponsored you for a green card yet, most likely, because you haven't worked at like a big US corporation that tends to do that. So that means that time is passing and more and more people are getting in line ahead of you to get a green card. So I would just say the way the game is played, there's a limited number of green cards every year. If you have an EB-1, that's a higher preference than an EB-2, and you're allowed to shuffle priority dates. So if you have an EB-1, 2, or 3 spot in line, and then you get a new EB-1, 2, or 3 petition, you can reuse your old date, your priority date, your spot in line on the new green card. So a lot of F1 regular OPT, I've had the conversation several times where somebody's going to get their master's degree in a STEM field in May and they're from India. And it's like, well, I think you should do an EB-2 NIW now with a business plan because you want to be a founder and it's time to lock in your priority date. But that's going to mean international travel is hard. You're probably not going to be able to renew your F1, and you may want to consider trying to get an O1 instead of STEM OPT and use that first year of regular OPT to really become qualified for that visa. As you mentioned, the EB-1 category is the fastest. There's EB-1A, EB-1B, EB-1C. There's so many. We have green cards for sheep herders and nurses. There's so many types of green cards. So this is super narrow. And the reason we like these is because startup founders are our audience, and these are most effective for startup founders with substantial equity in their companies. So if you're going to work at like Google, for example, and you've been at Google Switzerland for a year and they're transferring you to Mountain View because now you're going to run their AI thing as a manager in Mountain View, you know, that corporate setup could help you get an EB-1C. And we'll talk about this more, but you could also get an EB-1C through a startup. You don't have to be like a super massive company in order to qualify. So These are all fast. You can own a lot of your company if it's through a company. You can self-petition for an EB-1A and an EB-2 NIW. So you as a human person can sign your papers. There doesn't have to be any company involved. So if your company goes out of business, your green card is safe. And none of these have the perm process, as you mentioned. So that really saves. How much time do you think that would save right now, not needing to do perm?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably close to 20 months with all
20
the
months.
department leader. Yeah,
That's more than a
pretty
year and a half.
brutal.
That's all, we're talking almost 2 years now, getting
Yeah.
lost in perm. So even companies might want to do this for employee job satisfaction and happiness and
Yeah,
trust.
and we
Positive
see a lot of
workplace.
people who, yeah, and just like they already have a perm and it's in their pocket, but their priority date is so backlogged and they're like, okay, I'm going to pivot. I'm also going to self-sponsor myself for an EB-1A. I'm going to take that priority date from my perm that was filed 8 years ago,
Yeah.
and now I'll be able to get my green card. So we see a lot of that too.
Okay, so let's go on. And I see lots of wonderful questions. We're mostly going to be talking about green cards today. I do see that we have some questions about O1s and H1Bs. So we'll get to those later if we have time, but we do have a lot of resources on our website about those. But I guess just to provide that framework, in case you don't know, an H1B is a work visa petitioned by a company. Now we can get them for startup founders, even with majority ownership of their company and no boards, which is incredible. It's so liberating for people. That just happened 6 days ago, a week ago. It was last Friday. And then the other is an O1, and that's a 3-year visa for somebody with extraordinary ability. And a lot of founders like having that visa because there's no lottery and there's no prevailing wage that you have to meet. And if you set it up through an agent, you can have multiple jobs that you're doing. So they're kind of like the precursors. And any visa. Oh, this is also important. You can go from any visa to any green card, and you can do a green card even if you're outside of the country. So have you ever had cases like that where there's a family and they have teenagers and they want to move, but only with green cards?
Yeah, I mean you've got to secure the process. They'll age out at age 21. There are some provisions that allow you to kind of latch on and preserve their date, but sometimes that can be what's putting pressure on them to start the process earlier.
Right.
They'd love for their kids to come here and benefit too.
Yeah, I had an astronaut once who I helped, and he was very specific that he wanted to move his family here, but only with green cards. And so he was starting when the kids were like 14 to have enough time so that they could have a green card before going to college, but he didn't want to have his family moved if he was dealing with O1 and H renewals. So we just went straight for the green card. So if you're in another country, and even if you've never had ESTA or a visitor visa or ever lived or worked in the United States, you too can get a green card. It will probably take 2 to 4 years, maybe, for one of these if you're outside the United States. Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, immigrant visa processing is kind of a gamble because, the one process in the US we have control over with premium processing for these case types. But once the case, has to be adjudicated through the embassy, that can take a bit longer.
Yeah.
And it's a bit unpredictable.
Yeah, and that's really fluctuated a lot with the pandemic, and there's still backlogs, and they've prioritized family reunification immigrant visas at consulates. So I think, yeah, most startup founders wanted to be here yesterday, so they all get visas first, and then we figure out how to get them green cards.
Right.
Okay, great. All right. Oh, and here is the summary. Why these? Okay, here we go. This is what we came up with. You can self-petition. Linda, why is self-petitioning helpful for a startup founder?
I think it's great because it gives you tremendous flexibility. It doesn't tie you to an employer. It just basically ties you to your area of expertise. You get the green card and you can just continue to work in that field. And you have a lot of flexibility. Go to another company, start another company. Flexibility is key.
Yeah, it's technically for a permanent offer of employment. So if you're like an astrophysicist and you get your green card and then you immediately stop doing anything related to physics and you fulfill your lifelong dream to become a visual artist, like that might be a problem.
Yeah,
But
that's outside your field. Yeah.
yeah, but if you're
Flexibility,
planning
yeah.
to work in good faith for some years in your field, then it's legit.
Mhm.
How about, waiting for an employer? How can that be for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of companies, particularly larger companies, they're going to have a waiting period to sponsor green cards for foreign nationals, and they may require them to be in like a non-immigrant status, like H1 or L1 or TN or O1, and then they have like a 6-month or a 12-month waiting period. So if you qualify for one of these self-sponsored tracks, then you can get yourself in the green card line a lot faster. So it's a huge benefit.
Sorry. And sometimes I think one of the things that people also want to know is, will their employer find out? So if they do this by themselves, under what circumstances would they be required to notify their company?
Yeah, I mean, so if they have to extend their non-immigrant status, it may be appropriate to include a copy of the I-140 approval notice. But it's not that they're have another employer that's backing them. I think they can explain it in such a way that I'm doing this just to benefit myself.
Yeah.
And in the end, the company will benefit because they don't have to do the green card sponsorship. So it can be delicate, but it does generally have to be disclosed if you're extending a work visa that's tied to that company.
Yeah, because that I-129 form will want to know prior green cards and other work visas. Yeah. Okay. And so overall, just faster and also a more efficient process as well. Both you're skipping the whole perm, and there aren't as many concurrent filings right now because of the visa bulletin and the way it is today, but there may be changes to that real soon. But if your priority date, I think, let's break this down for folks right now. What are the two major filing processes that we do for a self-petitioned green card? The step 1 and the step 2. What are those documents and what do they signify?
Yeah, so the first phase is called the I-140, and that's the petition for immigrant worker. And that applies to all these categories that we're talking about. What is included in the application is different, but you're essentially telling the government that you qualify for green card status or permanent status based on your occupation or your future endeavor. That's the first hurdle, so to speak. And then the next step is the I-45 adjustment of status. So when you have a current priority date, then you can proceed to the final stage. And that's when you're asking the government, if you're in the US, to change your status from a non-immigrant or temporary or student, whatever it is, to a permanent resident.
And to explain to everybody how the priority date comes into play, like which part gives you a priority date, and then when do you need to show the priority date?
Yeah, so when you file the I-140, the filing date becomes your priority date. And when USCIS, they do issue like these fancy bond paper receipt notices that has all your particulars on it. We'll have your priority date listed there. And that's something you want to make sure you check to be sure it's accurate. So that filing date is like your priority date, just like with the perm process, which is outside of this realm.
Yeah. And so you always want to remember to tell your legal team if you have a priority date from another process, so that that can be included, and then we can essentially reuse it in the new petition. Yeah,
it's great how you can attach a priority date from another filing, and that just pushes you ahead in the line a little bit faster. And sometimes we've had clients who thought that they had a withdrawn I-140 or denied I-140, and then USCIS will say, actually, no, we're giving you this priority date because our records show that this is your priority date. We just recently did this for a client. And now we're doing like a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, just to get a copy of the I-140 approval. And
what wonderful news. That's so amazing.
Yeah.
Like, they saved so many years. That's incredible. That's great. It's amazing. Okay, so let's talk about some of these options. We're going to go through them at a broad overview level, and then we're going to talk about the visa bulletin, and then we're going to kind of like talk about how to become qualified and what the standards are. And then we're sort of going to do like a final compare and contrast before we open it up for questions. All right. So the EB1A, this is most equivalent to an O1A, and it's for extraordinary ability. And it's like the best, sort of. The government in the laws in the 1960s decided that the first preference Part A top people they wanted to incentivize to come to the States were people in this category of extraordinary ability and sustained national or international acclaim in a field or subfield in a country or in the world. So this is where your Nobel Prize winners would go in, your Pulitzer Prize winners. I think this is how our former First Lady got her modeling green card to the United States. So this is like the top of the top. But I think that like trips people up because they're like, well, I want that type of green card because it's better. But is it actually better? Do you get more perks? Really?
I mean, for some folks, it gives you a faster place in line, right? So I think it's like you've got to weigh out the factors of priority date and do you really qualify? I mean, the standards are high, but they are also that you've risen to the top in your field. It doesn't mean you're, you know, so you can narrow that field and then show what the how you meet those accomplishments.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say if you have multiple options, don't let your ego get too attached to like, oh, I have to do EB1A because I have to prove to my mom that I'm special. Just like do the one that's solid and good and fast enough and that you can qualify for. But if you have multiple options, choose the easiest one. Don't force yourself into something harder for ego. And a green card is a green card is a green card. So at the end of the day, with all of these, you're getting a lifetime status of permanent residence, and the card is this plastic card that's issued in 10-year increments. And it's the same, and it allows you to work and live and become a citizen equally. So there's many paths up the mountain. This is just who gets to be in the fastest line, essentially. And as you said, you don't have to be the best in the world. You can be the best in a narrow subfield in a tiny country, and it can work. It doesn't have to be the US, you know, you can be the best. I don't know. And it's so trendy, whatever the technologies are that we're seeing, because the waves of what venture is funding change so rapidly. So like a year ago, it was all the blockchain founders, and then it was the generative AI founders. And now we're seeing a lot of space technology. So whatever your field is, wherever the funding is going, whatever the leading edge of innovation is, we can use that as your field. And then if you're like the best generative AI founder of Tunisia, we can use that, you know? So it can be a very tiny group of people that you're comparing yourself to. But this is definitely it is achievable, and it's overall the fastest, and it's most significant for people from India and China, or who don't have an old priority date. So like if somebody's in a master's degree now and they're from India and nobody's ever gotten a green card for them, ultimately getting an EB1A is going to be the fastest way to get a green card. But you don't have to be qualified yet for an EB1A. You could start with an EB2 NIW to get a priority date. And then later, after you've had that sustained acclaim, you could switch to an EB1A. So,
and that's really a great strategy, Sophie. I mean, we see a lot of people who come to us and like, I want to do everything. It's like, well, let's start with this case, and then you'll know how to build out your profile. We give them some goals, right? And then a year, 6 months, we can pivot to that EB1 if it's
exactly. And I would say overall, the EB2 NIW is easiest if for entrepreneurs, and then an O1 is a little bit harder. And then an EB1A is a little bit harder. And so having an O1 is not necessary to get an EB1, but it's helpful and it's persuasive. And I feel like it gives the immigration officer adjudicating the case a little bit of cover and they feel protected because like somebody else already approved an O1. So it's like a little bit more
Yeah, it's not quite the deference policy, but we're gonna still
Yeah.
accept that approval and say that does give us some weight, or it's like a foundation, I kind of think of it as.
Yeah, yeah. And we've had some clients that had, for whatever reason, like 4 or 5 O1s. And so then we get to be like, look, this person was approved for an O1A 5 times. So they're clearly sustained in national or international acclaim. So, and a lot of this just comes down to us as legal professionals and whatever immigration law team you go with, but their expertise and familiarity with the field and with the types of arguments and the types of evidence and how well we can argue and tell the story to the government of why you qualify. Okay, so let's dive in to the visa bulletin, because this can be a little bit overwhelming for people, and we've talked about it a lot. And okay, so we have 3 charts, I believe, that we're going to look at. We have the dates for filing, we have the final action dates, and then USCIS for November is using the dates for filing. Okay, so the visa bulletin, it's like, where do we start?
I
Okay.
know, it's so convoluted, it really is.
So to calculate how long, it doesn't even tell you how long you have to wait, which is the other crazy thing. To calculate who is at the front of the line, imagine a deli and it's super crowded and they just have a numbering system, and you just go in and you take a number, and then there's a big crowd, and then people get called up to order their sandwiches. So you're looking around and you don't really know, if somebody's going to order a huge dinner or just a bag of chips, but then they have a sign on the wall that's like saying now serving number 42. And then you're like, oh, I'm 63. Great. Maybe I'll have to wait 10 minutes, an hour. I don't know, but you can see the number. Yeah, 10 years. Exactly. Exactly. So this is just telling you like what number is being called now. And it's the date of when somebody got their perm, if their I-140 was approved, or when their first I-140 was approved. That's the formula for what a priority date is. And you can see all of the different categories. We've been talking about EB1 and EB2 and NIW. So that's in the first and second preference category. And then we have really racist laws. So they just discriminate based on what country you were born in. So you just go in a line for your country of birth or your spouse's country of birth. Sorry. And so countries with high levels of immigration have their own categories, because people are chosen at a reduced rate from that country, slowing down when people get their green cards. So the State Department has their own set of when they allow people to file and when they issue immigrant visas. And then for adjustment of status, USCIS has now made its own determination of which of these State Department charts they're going to pay attention to. So for November of 2023, next month, if you're doing an immigrant visa in your home country and not doing adjustment of status in the United States, let's say you're from India and you want to get an EB1, so you would need a priority date on or before July 1st, 2019 to be able to start your immigrant visa filing for your green card. Now, you can see that if you're from Europe, you're current in EB1 right now. There's a tiny backlog back to about 10 months ago, January 2023 for EB2 for Europe. That used to be current, but it's not right now. China has dates in 2022 and 2020. India is the most backlogged with 2019 for EB1 and 2012 for EB2.
And this is the more favorable dates for filing chart.
Yeah, let's take a look at the final action dates. So these are a little bit older. So to get your actual immigrant visa, you have to have been waiting even longer. So this tells you those cutoffs. Now, for November, USCIS has determined that they will use the State Department's dates for filing. So that helps people file a little bit sooner. One other thing I wanted to mention is recently, I'll see if I can find a link. Recently, I did an analysis for one of my TechCrunch articles on calculating how long people would actually have to wait if they started the process now for India. And we replicated the math that the Cato Institute used in, I think, 2018. They did an analysis pre-pandemic that said India, EB2, you would have to wait 151 years for your spot in line. So we, oh yeah, I have the link right here. So I'm going to put this in the chat window. This is the TechCrunch article that I published that we republished without the paywall on our alcorn.law website to make that more accessible to people. But I believe we calculated that if you started now with your first priority date ever, based on the number of people who have already been waiting in line, if you're from India, it might take about 4 years to get an EB1 in total, and maybe 10 to 12 years to get an EB2 in total. So that's a completely separate, how long you're going to need to wait is a completely different calculation than who's at the front of the line, because there can be a bulge of people that applied and you don't necessarily see that. But we are watching this very closely, and God willing, there may be announcements in the near future that will dramatically shift this. It's been a priority for the Biden administration, and there has been a lot of political pressure to see what lawmakers can do to recapture a bunch of unused green cards from over the years, especially during the pandemic, and to repurpose them for people waiting in line today. And so if that happens, there may be rapid forward movement in many of the categories. But it is still, I mean, if just to play this game, it's like it's a race, and it's a zero-sum game. And basically, the sooner you get a spot in line, the sooner you're going to get your green card. And by delaying, there might be it could be nonlinear. It seems exponential. Like, I think there's been hockey stick growth in the EB1A category over the last several years. So by doing it now, you're going to be saving. And I know by giving this advice, we're incentivizing everybody to race, and that's creating more applications, which is adding to the backlogs, but just in single player mode, how to maximize your own best chances for yourself. The incentive is to get a priority date as early as possible.
Yeah, and I think one other like kind of weird nuance to this process is they're looking at your country of birth. I know people are like dual citizens, but if you have a spouse that's from another country or was born in another country, you can actually cross-charge their country of birth. So we've had some people, you know, be able to kind of play that game where they apply their spouse's country of birth and they kind of get into a better queue.
Yeah. So least feminist advice ever is just to get married and don't pursue your extraordinary ability. And then second best is like, if your parents are going to arrange a marriage for you or something, maybe find somebody born in a country besides India or China. All right. So let's talk about another variation of the EB1. And this is not a self-petition. This is a company petition. But it is EB1C. And so it's a little bit, it's first preference. So it's just as fast as an EB1A. And you don't have to prove extraordinary ability. Can you describe the EB1C and what that is, please?
Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of, it pairs with the L1 often, which is a multinational manager or executive. So it's really someone that has worked abroad for a foreign entity for at least a year in an executive or managerial capacity. Then they can become eligible for this L1 or even just the EB1C to transfer to the US to be in this executive or manager capacity.
Yeah. And I think we just saw with new regulations that sole proprietors can't do it, but as long as the companies share a common ownership,
that's like the trick. We've got to get that down. We've got to, you know, graph it out. But a lot of times the US is going to be the parent company if they're looking for
Right.
funding.
Right.
So that's helpful. But we have to be able to show both entities are doing business. So, it's sometimes if we have an L1, so that's kind of like the precursor to the EB1C, I say, let's wait until you've come into the US for 6 months, show some business activity. We have a lease for 6 months, and then we can pivot to the EB1C green card.
Yeah. And sometimes people are like, well, I had like a small LLC in my home country, and then I created my Delaware corporation, and then I'm making my home business a subsidiary, and I use that to pay my contractors. But if you don't have a lot of employees, or you're the only person, it might not work. This is for businesses really that, and I hate putting a number on it because the laws don't have a number, but I would say having at least 5 US employees and having at least 10 abroad employees is sort of like a minimum.
Yeah, I actually really agree with those. I always like the 10 abroad, and sometimes a little less than 5, just because you can have remote people that are working that are considered US. But I agree with those. Those are good numbers.
And then if you're like, oh, I want to get a green card and I don't want to deal with EB1A, and I want to get an EB1C and I don't have the setup yet, you would literally, and you're in the US, you would literally have to leave for a year, set up a company, go on payroll, work there, get paid, build up legitimate operations, and then move back, which is very disruptive, I would say, if that's not part of your business plan. So it's like easier and faster and less mental load actually to just deal with the EB1A and get a little bit famous. And then
and like that 1 year that you have to work abroad, you can't be coming to the US for large chunks of time because it's going to count against that 1 year. So it's complicated. It doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Now the EB2 NIW. So EB2 normally requires perm. So the reason we're waiving something in the national interest waiver is because we're waiving the perm process. So we're saying, because you're going to help America, we're going to skip the part where we try to replace you first. So that's what that is. Really briefly, it's easier if you have a master's degree or a PhD, but it's not required. We've had people who never went to college get it. The alternative, if you don't have a master's or higher, is proving exceptional ability. And that is way easier than an O1, because it's like 10 years working in the field. If not, fine. Do you have a degree that's related? Do you have any certifications? Have people recognized you? It's a very low standard. And so if you're thinking about an O1, this is a lot easier to get. And it's a completely different analysis. It's future oriented. The EB1A and the O1A are looking back, like, what did you do in the past? The EB2 national interest waiver is really like, what are you going to bring to America? How are you going to help us out? So it's future oriented. And we can use a business plan, and don't write your own startup business plan for this, unless maybe you went to like the GSB or HBS and that's really easy for you. But we just hire a contractor to do these very professional, really long, tons of Excel business plans that give USCIS exactly what they're looking for with the details about your business.
Agreed, 100%.
And it also opens up, for like O's and EB1s, we're sort of talking about like how you're a leader of business or engineering or science. This is a little bit more broad. We got one for like a housing disability rights advocate. We got one for like somebody with a language translation, small business. Lots of startups that are doing artificial intelligence are a clear shoe-in for this. Anything that has security implications where the US is trying to maintain a global lead would be very compelling. But even anything in life sciences, health, or simply just job creation and tax base, like all of those are ways to show you're going to help America. Even basic research and science could be helpful. So you don't have to be a founder to get an EB2 NIW.
Yeah, it's so broad that it's you can be so creative with these cases, which is kind of exciting as an immigration attorney. It's not like just checking boxes, like you're really making an argument and trying to draw out what that, national importance is for the work that they'll be doing. So it's pretty exciting when we work on these cases.
Really exciting. Yeah. Okay, and we're going to get to questions in just a minute, but to recap, if you want to figure out how to become qualified for an EB1A, there are 10. Okay, so the O1 has 8 categories, but doesn't involve artists for an O1A. The EB1A has 10 categories, but 2 of them are more related to performing arts. So you might be able to use those if you're a creative type, but in general, most of our clients fall into these 8 standard categories. And the key difference between an O1 and an EB1, there actually are technical, legal, regulatory variations. Like they didn't have version compare in Microsoft Word in 1964 when they were writing these laws. So they like tweaked the EB1A and it's slightly different from the O1A. They like added a few words here and there. So it's a little bit different. But in general, if you've been doing this for a while, and if you have like a track record, so like not just one startup that just raised $5 million for the first time, but like the startup was successful or it failed and now you're doing your second startup, but kind of like a longer term track record, you could get qualified for an EB1A. I'll just make some quick notes on here, Linda, before we go to questions. One is awards. One of my biggest takeaways from going to TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco this fall and speaking there was all of the what's it called? People not believing in themselves because they're like, I haven't raised venture capital, so I can't get an O1 or an EB1. And I'm like, what? Why are you saying that? Like, no, so just to put it out there, if you're listening to this, the whole reason I decided to write all this stuff in TechCrunch about how you can get a visa or green card through the startup game with venture capital was because before that, nobody thought it was possible. Immigrants couldn't be startup founders because USCIS didn't know how to deal with non-traditional, non-brick and mortar companies. So they would be like, you have money, but you have no revenue. You have people on a couch, but you have no office. You're not selling anything. You're creating a community. Somehow you have a valuation and people are giving you money. Like what sort of weird like huckster scheme is this, right? So just proving like, no, this is a whole economy. This is a viable business model. Like that was the innovation that getting venture capital could help you get a visa. That being said, most people in the universe who get these visas and green cards don't have it, and it's fine. It's just we can pretend that VC money is an award, and that might help you get one of the prongs, but you need 3 of the prongs. Having 4 is great. Having 5 is better. We get a bunch of letters that we help you write that prove all this. And so since 80% of you are startup founders, like you could get this as a researcher or a professor or a business leader, but just to focus on founders, awards could be, okay, VC money, country level science grants from the US or other countries, winning competitions, like the big hackathon at Disrupt, being your membership in professional organizations that are hard to get into. A lot of our clients join the Forbes Business or Technology Councils, which you can just apply for online. We've had a lot of success with people joining Founders Network. I'm happy to make a nomination there for anybody. You could be in like IEEE on some sort of like senior research committee, setting standards in your scientific field. You could be an advisor or an investor potentially. You could be in a like a Y Combinator or 500 Global or Techstars Accelerator. Publicity could be there's like one Business Insider article about you and like 5 articles back from your home country. Or it could be citations in scientific journals. You could be a judge of competitions, hackathons, technology awards. You could be a venture scout. What you created matters. So having a patent pending or having a patent granted is helpful, but not everything is patentable. So disrupting an industry can be helpful. An author is a really easy one to get. I know that a lot of our applied engineers hate non-determinative thinking processes, and it can be overwhelming for them to think about thought leadership and publicity, but there's no rule that says you can't hire a publicist or a ghostwriter. I can help people publish like first person how I built this stories on TechCrunch Plus. If you join Forbes, a Forbes Council, you can publish 1 article a month with them. There's other publications you can write for as well. Our client in China wrote 9 articles in a online Chinese product management journal, and then she ended up getting a book deal and had a best-selling
Wow.
in China as a result of it. And I just forced her to do it, and she hated it. And now she's a best-selling book. We can argue leadership in your company, and then we can do like weird arguments about convertible notes and safe notes and price rounds and stuff to calculate the value of your company. So that's pretty common for founders. And if you're not a founder, it's okay. There's lots of alternatives. A few notes on becoming qualified before we answer a couple questions. Preparation is key. We have an online class called Alcorn Academy, and Alex, can you please share the registration link to that, as well as our promo code for everybody in the webinar chat. So that's an online class with 15 video modules that I recorded about 2 years ago when I think I had pink hair in the pandemic. And it still stands. It's maybe gotten even a little easier because the Biden administration is even more forgiving, but that's a great starting place if you've done nothing and you're trying to map this out in your field. We've also created an assessment program. So like, I think I want an O1 or an EB2 NIW or an EB1A, but I don't know if I'm qualified, and I've studied and I've done what I can, and I'm trying to figure out it's enough, and I don't want to keep spinning my wheels, endlessly trying to become more qualified if I can just apply now. So we call that Legal Launch. And you are welcome to sign up for that. And I'll just tell you, like normally for an O1 or an EB1A or EB2 NIW, it's going to be about $3,000 to the government with premium processing. The business plan is going to be about $3,000, and our legal fee ends up being 10 to 12K. So with Legal Launch, we charge you $2,500. We'll do this multi-stage review with written assessment and meetings with our legal team. And at the end of it, you'll know if we can accept you as our client, in which case we'll credit what you've already paid to your future case, or if not, we'll give you a detailed, personalized checklist for what you could do in your field to become qualified. Another thing that I am exploring is weekend retreats, traveling with me to some destination, probably in Northern California, Bay Area, to do like a workshop with 15 to 20 people. Maybe we'll meditate or have a bonfire, but you'll get to network with each other. And I have somebody I helped get an EB1, is like a design thinking expert, and her focus is on helping adults learn and get through fear. And so I'm talking with her on how to redesign the Alcorn Academy curriculum for in-person workshops with peers, so that you could walk away from the weekend having your full roadmap to your O1 or your EB1A or your EB2 NIW, and make friends along the way and have meaningful experience in a bonfire. I just want to meditate. And then I was thinking we could get like singing bowls or something. So if that's of interest to you, I'm doing like pre-planning. So you can email hello@alcorn.law, subject line, I don't know, weekend with Sophie. And then I'll take that into consideration. Okay. So in summary, and I've been talking so much, let's see if we can answer a few questions very briefly, but I do want to share this chart. Here's my analysis of how to compare and contrast. So they have different bases. You can self-petition with an EB1A or an EB2 NIW, but you have to have a company to get an EB1C. There's no perm for any of them. Premium processing is different. It's 45 days for EB1C and EB2 NIW, but it's only 15 days for EB1A. EB1A is the hardest. EB1C and EB2 NIW are easier. And if you're from India or China, getting an EB1 ultimately is extremely advantageous, but to reserve your spot in line, you might simply want to get an EB2 NIW first. Okay, so I think we have 1 minute. Oh my gosh. Okay. I was worried we wouldn't have enough content. Okay, so let me just scan through. Somebody is asking about pre-seed funding from a VC. When's the right time to think about a green card? I think the right time is now. Contact us. We can even just do a consultation, and then we can help guide you towards Alcorn Academy or Legal Launch. You'll all get our newsletters for future webinars on H's and O's, but if you need a consultation now, just reach out. Timing is one of those things that's very individual and based on your particular dates of entry, visas, family members, travel needs. So we have to do that in a one-on-one setting. And I think just the really critical thing, let's see, we shared pricing. We talked about VCs is optional. And yes, this recording will be shared with everybody. And you'll be getting an email from Alex about next steps. And we did talk about ballpark employees for EB1C.
And we kind of talked about the regulations changing to the H-1B reg, the new that are going to open the door for founders that have majority ownership. So, you know, we're moving in the right direction.
We're going to be doing, actually, that's a really important thing for this audience. We're going to do a whole webinar on the H-1B modernization regulations and how you don't need to give up control of your company or your equity to external people in order to get an H-1B anymore. I've been begging the government for years, and they just announced pages in response to my inquiries saying, like, don't need a common law definition of an employer-employee relationship. So that's super, super exciting. And there are going to be some additional good changes, coming in the next weeks, hopefully. So please pay attention to our newsletters, and we're going to be having lots more events. So thank you so much. Oh yeah, I wrote a book. It's a bestseller. Alex will send you the link because we're going to end this webinar now. But thank you so much, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you.